So in this particular tutorial, I'm going to have a look at creating additional normal map detail, but also allowing that normal map detail to be influenced by potential generators. So imagine that this particular asset, this is our base layer, so maybe the underside of the actual material, it's all dirty and rusty, and that's what we see on here. And essentially we have another material on top, and it's worn away and showing some of the underlying rust, which is what we can see on here. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create that material on top. So let's have a look what we have over here. So I'll just choose something which I think will do the job quite nicely. We could try this one, for example, galvanized ductwork. I'll just use that one. And I'll just pop that on the top there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to underlying rust, actually, rather than button. The underlying even. So I'll just rename that correctly. And go rename this to upper paint there. Obviously, there's a whole multitude of materials you can pop on there, but I'm just going to use this one as an example. So what we have is essentially an upper paint material, and elements of it going to be worn away, and the rust underneath will show. You can actually literally just use a simple mask, I suppose, but we're going to adopt a slightly different approach ultimately. But you can actually utilize these maps. So I can just drop on sharp dirt, for example, and then if I just invert this, I suppose, invert the upper layer, invert mask, then just modify the actual mask itself. Just by adjusting these sliders, you can see it's going to blend between the two actual materials. Not exactly a great mask saying that, but nonetheless. So let me just remove that mask and try and find edge strong, something which is going to be a bit more obvious. And if I just invert again the mask, or I can find invert, there we are. And now you can see some of the underlying material is coming through, which is here and here. So pretty self-explanatory, so play around with those masks, there's plenty of options there, but let's assume for whatever reason we want to do some additional non-map details, and in conjunction with a generator to add some additional detail on there. So I'm going to remove that mask completely. So I'm going to click on Add Black Mask, and this time around I'm going to click on the actual mask itself, and I'm going to right click and click on Add Generator. So this is going to allow me to make a custom mask using a generator. So if I click on Metal Edgeware, for example, and just tinker with some of these values, we probably need to invert this already, so we can just click on invert on here, invert on, and then we can see now if we just switch that on and off, you can see some of the underlying mask or the edge wear on the metal generator. So metal edge wear generator, we can tinker with this, we can adjust the wear level, for example, and obviously it will increase or decrease as the case may be. So quite useful for doing things in a custom way. You don't necessarily have to use the masks within this. You can actually just use the metal mask within that, and it can give you a nice look and feel, I suppose. So I'm just going to be a bit more subtle with this, don't go wild with it. Again, you can tinker with this till the cows come home, really. So I'll just do something along those lines there. That will do. Again, test it on and off, see what difference it does. Yeah, cool. So let's now add some actual normal map details to this and see what it looks like. So we have our upper paint layer, we've got our underlying rust, we've got our sharpen on there, the normal map on there, and we did some ambient occlusion as well at some point. So let's now make a new fill layer. This time around what we're going to do is, in fact we don't want to use fill layer actually, we need to use a layer. Just close that down. Just click on add layer, and then within here I'm just going to call this normal map detail. Call it normal map detail or hinges or whatever it is you're going to add on there. I'll just call it normal map details. So this new normal map needs to be underneath all the other existing materials. And that will make sense. There's a technical reason for that, I suppose, but it will make sense in a few moments. So what we need to do here is just make sure that we remove everything with the exception of the normal map. So by default, you most probably have something along these lines when you make a new layer, and there'll be nothing in the normal. And you might have something in the stencil as well. Make sure you close that down. So if you see something along these lines in the stencil, obviously close that down. If you see anything in the alpha, such as this, then close that down. All you want is a blank alpha, no stencil, and as I said previously, in all likelihood you're going to have all of these. So all we need to do is define nothing but the normal. So you need to have the normal on there. So if we go to hard surfaces, there's a load of pre-existing normal maps that you can utilize. This allows you to add on hinges, vents, screws, that type of thing. All the type of things that would probably be time consuming to model, and arguably when they're so small on screen, a waste of time modeling when it can be done via an alpha. So let's just find something that looks interesting. This one over here, container 08. So I'm just going to drop that on top of here. And you can now see my icon has now changed to reflect that particular hard surface normal. I'll need to rotate this because my angle's a bit weird at the moment, so I'm just going to basically put this down to 0 in terms of the angle, which I've modified in there. I'm just going to pop this over here somewhere. Just going to rotate this around so it's nice and square, level. Use the arrow keys, the brackets to scale up and down. You can always just adjust it via here, I suppose, as well. And I'm just going to stamp that down like so. So just press once and that's going to stamp that down. So initially it doesn't look all that interesting, it looks a bit dull and boring and you can't see what's going on with it. But essentially what it's done is just going to stamp that normal map detail into our actual texture. If I go stamp, 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 you can see what's going on. You can obviously use as many of these as you want, so let's find this one over here, handle, I don't know, let's find some interesting ones. Container 11, and try that one. And then maybe this particular one can be some form of hinge or something that goes on here, for example. I'm just going to stamp that down once there as well. So it doesn't look all that interesting at the moment, but the issue we have is we've stamped this non-map detail down, but it's not being influenced by the pre-existing metal edgeware generator. So this is where we use some clever options within Substance Painter and allow this normal map or this new non-map detail to be impacted by the generator. So we try and hopefully get some of this wear and tear applied to this, and it will help bring it to life. So what we need to do is just go into our non-map details layer, make sure it's at the bottom, right click and define it as an anchor point. So click right at the bottom, add anchor point. Call it something appropriate, so maybe AP underscore anchor point. You could call it vent, whatever you want to call it. Agree with that. So we need to tell the generator to utilize this particular anchor point. So click on the metal edgeware generator. We need to go into micro details, and you need to tell it that the micro detail normal is set to on. You need to also click on micro detail, set this to have your anchor point. So we've already done that. We just need to click on over here, micro normal uniform color, and in here click on anchor points and click on AP normal map details. And then lastly, we just need to reference the channel to be normal. And then just give it a few moments, and immediately you can see it's now been impacted by that. So I'll just set this off again. So you can see at the moment, nothing going on, very, very dull, boring. Let's pop over to this one over here. But the moment we set the reference channel to normal, after having done the other steps obviously, it's now going to be impacted by that generator. So now we've got something that has a normal on there and the general wear and tear on the generator attached to it as well. And ultimately we can still go back into our pre-existing normal, so our micro details map. We just click on that and we can define whatever additional look and feel we want to go for. So let's assume find some interesting over here. There's a vent over here, drag this vent across, and maybe these vents somehow on this particular section over here. There's a row of them perhaps. Again, just stamp it down. 1. Give it a few moments to do its thing. 2, 3. And now we've got a scenario where you can see that detail in there as well. So this is very, very useful for adding in detail, which arguably would be very time consuming to do on the actual normal map itself, or the high poly. We're trying to actually put that detail on via just the texture, strictly just the texture. So almost like you can using the dedo tool, I suppose, in many ways. And we can always modify the materials, etc. afterwards. Let's try some additional detailing. So there's lots of interesting ones over here. Bearing in mind that if you look at these carefully, these are nothing but very, very, very simple normal map details. So you could effectively create a shape within a 3D modeling software package, high resolution version, bake that onto what could be a screw or a panel, bake that directly onto a flat plane, and then that flat plane create an alpha in the normal map, and then import it into this, and you can utilize your own custom ones as well as the many pre-existing ones which are available online. And feel free to use those to your heart's content as well. There's nothing wrong with utilizing any of these. But in the long run, I would advise you to try and make some of your own, just to get a more of a unique look and feel to your asset. So this area looks a bit blank, really, I suppose. Let's just stamp some details on there. And obviously, we can paint all of this till the cows come home anyway. We can just go drag it along, and it will just paint it in like so. But obviously, don't go wild because it will just take forever to compute. And then maybe, well, obviously our wooden handle is no longer a wooden handle, but never mind. Let's see what options we are got to play with. So let's just stamp that down again. I don't know, use round, round shape. Round shape would be quite useful. Maybe help us define some of these areas which suggest almost there should be a bolt or a screw perhaps. I'm just going to scale that down and just stamp that here. I mean, to be fair, if it's so small that the level of texture space is so insignificant that you're not going to see a great deal. So clearly, when I stamp it like so, you can barely notice it yet. If I was to increase the size of this significantly and then stamp it, then you are more likely to get a decent result. So stamp that down there, and then clearly you can now see you've got a far better result. So don't expect wonders. Don't expect that you're going to scale it down to like so, and then you're going to be able to produce the world's most detailed bolt in this corner. It's just not going to happen. So just be slightly wary of it. Obviously, we are also looking at this at 2048, so it is something to take note of. When we start looking at baking this out at 4096, then it's safe to say that we will significantly improve the quality of these particular stamped sections. So it will look better than what you can actually see in there. But regardless, you get the general idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that process again, just so you are familiar with it, and then follow me through. Very, very, very straightforward. So I'm just going to delete our underlying our layer on top, and I'm also going to delete my pre-existing normal map. We'll try that again. So just go into Smart Materials or Materials, whatever one you want to do, and I'm going to add another one on there. We want something relatively clean, tram metal, I suppose. Ooh, don't know. SR Silver Metal Dusty, so at some point I will have made this. Add that on top. No idea what it's going to look like, to be fair, but we'll soon find out. It looks like I've used a pre-existing base normal map from a previous texture in this actual material, so I expect it to be pretty screwed once it loads up. There we are, and it's pretty screwed. So I'm just going to turn that off. Yeah. Again, just get an idea of before and after. Yeah, that looks okay. So we've got arguably a cleaner metal at the top, and then arguably the underlying detail underneath. That will do. So first steps first, create the well, you can do this in numerous orders, I suppose, but you do need the pre-existing layer where the non-map detail is going to be on in the first place, I suppose. So let's try that. So add a fill layer, add a layer, not a fill layer, and turn off everything with the exception of oopsie-daisy. What I've done is I've actually turned it all back on because I'm a bit stupid like that. Turn it all back off, and we should just have the normal map detail on there, or the normal map option. So it's going to remember the pre-existing hard surface alpha. So all I'll do is I'll just pop another one on there. Try this one, for example. I have no idea what this one is. It's a shame you can't just select it and you have to go through the option of dragging it across, but never mind. Let's just stamp this bad boy on here. Like so. We'll stamp that across there, see what that one looks like. We do need to obviously add the generator on top of this, this particular silver dusty layer, and we also need to call this our normal map layer, so normal map details, and just adjust this to the bottom. Remember to put it at the bottom. Define this as an anchor point, so add anchor point. Call it what you wish. SR normal details stamp yada 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 yada, and then go back into our silver metal dusty, add a generator. We'll need to add a black mask first. Add a generator to that. We'll use, again, you can play around with these I suppose, but I'm just going to use a metal one. I suppose it's relevant. And then just adjust the values to something you're happy and content with. Looks like we need to invert the actual map itself. Where the a bit of a blend between the two. Give that a twirl. I don't think it's going to work out that great given the nature of the textures themselves, but you know, we'll continue with it anyway. So now that we've defined that, the metal edgeware generator, we just need to go into the generator settings and ensure that this thing has the correct gubbins assigned. So in terms of micro details, we need to tell it to turn the micro detail norm map on. We can also adjust some of these, I suppose, and modify the actual final output further, I suppose. So within micro normal, define our anchor point, and the reference channel needs to be on normal. And then you can just give it a few seconds to do its thing. And you can see now that's now got to be impacted. So if we just go back, because it hasn't made it much of a great deal to be fair, so just go back into the metal edgeware, and then just maybe adjust the levels on this, and see the difference it's making on that particular section as well. So it is changing it, but I think the nature of the actual texture it's not doing a fantastic job of it. So tinker with this. There's so many additional options within here. You can modify all this till the cows come home. As I said, be prepared to potentially wait a while things get rendered out. And let's finally just go back into our non-map detail and add something else on there as well. Let's try. This looks like an interesting shape. We'll try Vent 19. Let's assume for whatever reason we want an event on the side of that. Stamp that on. Looks okay. And then obviously stamp away till the cows come home. Knock yourselves out. Cool. So that's how to make a normal map with generator details applied to that. Give that a twirl. I think it can really help plain and simple areas, especially on your vehicles, for example. You could go think about adding in all these little sci-fi little sections to try and add a substantial level of visual interest. But obviously, take into account that try and keep your asset looking realistic. Don't just be using any of these for the sake of them. Obviously, in an ideal world, every single one of these would be applicable to your particular asset. In the majority of cases, they're not going to be. So, maybe you need to make your own, as the case may be. Maybe there's a pre-existing database of assets. I'm just going to stamp some of these in there. Yeah, looks interesting. Anyway, looks crap actually, but anyway, interesting but crap. Right, so give that a go anyway.